Before we get started, we're going to be doing this with a threading jig as opposed to hand thread chasing. If you're interested in hand thread chasing, I would encourage you to go out and look at the Wyoming Woodturners site, Sam Angelo. He's got some wonderful videos on hand thread chasing. Let's talk a little bit about wood. There are woods that you can cut with a jig, but you couldn't cut with a hand thread chaser. Hand thread chasing requires very dense, very hard wood, what somebody affectionately referred to as uranium enriched wood. That is, for the most part, it tends to be exotic woods that are fairly inexpensive, that you get green and you have to return them. I'm going to turn this one out of a little softer woods. I'm going to make the top out of walnut, and I'm going to make the bottom out of maple. This is a piece, I'll start off approximately 3.5 inches square. This one is a little over 3 inches in diameter and a little longer than we need, but about 5 inches. So let's get started.
We start by transferring the inside diameter to the outside, and then using a box scraper scrape the inside walls and make them parallel. We're going to use a scraper and scrape the inside of the box, a hook nose scraper similar to the ones that I'll have pictured here momentarily. Might call them a Dale Nish scraper. It makes it easier to get behind the shoulder. And then we're going to follow up with a round nose scraper to get a nice smooth interior, and then we're going to sand the interior of the lid, of course, and I'm not bothering to show that. After the sanding, I come in with a cove tool to make a little cove where I'm going to texture using a shop-made texturing tool, kind of a Decorating Elf knockoff, if you will. And then I'm going to highlight the texturing with a pyramid tool. Now, I do have two videos I've made, one on box making, one on hollowing boxes, and also one on texturing. So if you're interested in those topics, you can get more depth information by watching those separate videos.
Okay, before we start threading, one last act is we need to put a slight chamfer right here, make it a little easier for the rotary cutter to enter the final threads from the bottom to enter. So we're just going to use this 3-point tool, put a slight chamfer here. Like so. Now let me show you the cutter. We're going to take this off. We're going to leave this on the chuck so we maintain the concentricity. Next, we're going to use a 3/8 inch collet. It has threads in the back for this coarse rod. And here's our 60-degree bevel rotary cutter. It simply goes in the collet, slides into the Morse taper where it's snug. Then we use the drawbar through the back of the spindle where it threads into the back of the collet and pulls it in tight for a nice, safe, secure fitting. Okay, we're ready to start threading the lid. We're going to use this EZ Threading Pro Threading Jig from Chefware Kits, and I'm going to show you their website here. We just simply thread it on, and we're going to cut on the inside, so we orient this like this and get it squared up. And I'm going to give you a different angle view in just a moment. And then once we get it touching the wood, we back it off. Then we're going to adjust, moving this XY axis forward 1.5 turns to cut it 0.056 of an inch deep on the 10 threads per inch setting. I find that to be a reasonable setting. We're going to use this knob right here. We're going to take the slack out of it, and I remember the way I remember whether it's moving forward or backward is left to me and right away. So we're going to move this right to me 1.5 turns, and I've got some little witness marks here 2, 3, 4, 5, just short of 6. And now we're going to start threading. Let me move the camera position so you can actually see the cutter. Okay, I like this threading jig. It's a little less expensive than the Best Woods Baxter jig. This is a real good value because it is cheaper. It's made in the UK, and it comes with interchangeable lead screws. This one is 10 threads per inch, but it's also available at a 16 thread per inch, a 12 thread per inch, and a 20 thread per inch. As I mentioned before, 16 is a nice middle of the road, but for a larger box, I like a 10-inch thread a little bit better. I don't know that I explained real well. I lined this up visually from the back as best I could get it straight on, parallel with the bedways. And when I said I moved the XY axis forward, actually in this case I moved it back so it would cut the thread. Now we're going to turn this to a high speed, and we're going to turn this thing on up. Now I put my left hand on the chuck to stabilize it. Everything is secured, and I just turn this wheel to forward the lead screw so it starts cutting. And usually I stop after I turn a couple of threads to see if I'm cutting deep enough. In this case, I don't think I am, so I'm going to back off a little bit and advance this, bring this back just a little bit more, maybe a quarter of a turn. I actually turned it the wrong way initially, so I need to adjust it a little bit further. And part of this is some trial and error. I mentioned I leave my left hand on here to stabilize it. It also keeps my left hand safely out of the way. You can either cut on this side or this side. I prefer to cut on this side because it's easier for me to move my head around and observe than it is on this side. We've got to adjust it a little bit more. You'll notice I cut it off before I bring it back. And the goal is to have threads that have just a bit of flat to them. You don't want them too sharp, or they'll be too crumbly, too delicate. And I look at these, and these don't look bad. I could probably take one more pass. So what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to flood this with CA and take one thin CA and then take one more pass. Okay, our CA is dry. Now we're going to bring it back into position. And notice by just rotating it and not moving the banjo or the position, we can roll it right back into exactly the same registration before against the wood, and then we lock the post down. And then because we're going to make it, we're going to take out just a little bit. We're going to back out. And then we're going to bring this to us about a quarter of a turn. Just to take out just a bit. Then we're going to tighten this back up. Everything's secure. You might wonder why I've got this texturing on here. I was practicing early on just to make sure this walnut would take the texturing pattern I'm going to use on the husk. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Speed's about 2,800, anywhere north of 2,500 is good. We'll gradually move this in, take one final cut. Now we're going to go ahead and take this off and mount it back on the lathe and start shaping our the outside. You can see we got some nice clean threads, and when we get it back on the lathe, we're going to brush over these a little bit with a brass brush to kind of clean it up. Okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean up, use this brass detail brush to kind of clean up those threads a little bit. And now we're going to shape the outside. We're going to transfer the inside depth to the outside. There's the bottom of the lid. We're going to make it maybe less than 1/4 inch thick, and then the rest of it will be for the stem and waist. So we'll go ahead and mark that. I like to go ahead and mark with a parting tool that line. We're going to leave it fairly thick because we're going to put some texture on there. So let's go ahead and we're going to take a moment to sand it. Okay, we've sanded this off, and now we've parted it down a little bit to give us room to work. We're going to finish taking this down a little bit to give us clearance. Then we're going to use the larger wheel on the Sorby micro spiraling tool, and we're going to cut some husks, first one direction and then the other. And we're going to put this in fast forward mode because this is not a demonstration on texturing, but on threading. So we're going to breeze through this. Okay, now tricky part. I've measured the inside recess, and then I added to that 0.056 inches to get the rough size of the outside flange. Now, one of the rules of wood that we know is that wood moves, and unfortunately this wood has moved a little bit, and I have not been able to get it to chuck it up straight. So I've got a feeling when I take this down and try to true it up, it may be outside of the tolerance, and if so, we may have to adjust this down a little bit. We'll just see. I can tell I've still got to go a little deeper, but I went ahead and made that full pass. Now let's bring it back. And just for grins, we're going to make a test. Sometimes it's not how the threads look, it's how they fit. In this case, they're a little sloppy. We're not going to take another pass. This is not the best fitting, not the best fit. Actually, it's pretty crude. I've got to evaluate whether I want to put up with a thread that's sloppy or go ahead and move the box down. Since I've got enough wood here, I'm enough of a perfectionist. That's too sloppy a thread, so I'm going to go ahead and back on the lathe, bring this tenon down, maybe hollow it a little bit more, and then we'll be back for threading. Okay, here we are back again, ready to thread the lid of the box. It's been tenon's been fit, rounded off, and sized to fit the female, which is 0.056 or 56 thousandths of an inch larger tenon than we measured the female recess. So let's get started. Crank up the speed past 2500. Here's a time it was handy to be able to reach out with my right hand to my emergency cutoff to shut it off. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flood this with CA just like we did before, and then we'll be back after it dries to take another pass. Okay, I flooded it with CA. It's now dry. I don't always flood woods with CA for threads, but woods that are spalted may be a little softer. Maple is not a real hard wood, so it seemed like a good idea. So I've now brought it back into registration and move this forward 1/4 of a turn, which was the last quarter of a turn to get to the full size thread. So here we go. Now this time, before we put it on, we're going to add just a bit of paste wax just to lubricate the threads. Sometimes this is not a bad idea, even while you're cutting the threads, before you cut them, to kind of lubricate the wood. Most any kind of wax will do. I just use this floor wax. Now let's give it a try. And I'd say that those are a nice fit. Not too snug, not too sloppy. Good fit. So now take the cutter off, put this chuck back on the lathe, finish shaping the outside of the box, and use this as a screw chuck for the top in order to finish the top. Okay, now we're going to finish shaping the lid of the box. I've just put this little extra support here from my Nova Live Center. It's a cone, so this provides some support without putting a hole in it. I've got plenty of room here. I double checked the measurements, so we're going to take this down a little bit. And there we have our acorn box. I'll make a screw chuck or a jam chuck and do some final finishing, but that's where we are. So they're a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Before we wrap up the video, I want you to take a moment and look at the gallery of threaded projects, and maybe there's something there that'll excite you. So let's look at those now. Comments are welcome. If you like the video, I hope you'll become a subscriber. Bye.